I love Rockstar Games. They are my favorite developer. I think of them as gods of open world design. I've spent days, not hours, but days playing their games. I spend $1,000 on their collectibles every year, and I take off days from work when their games, hell, sometimes even when their DLCs release. So yeah, I'm a bit of a Rockstar fanboy. And now, it's going to sound really weird that I'm about to criticize them, but know that I do it out of tough love. Two years ago, Rockstar released Red Dead Redemption 2, one of the most critically acclaimed open-world games with a narrative that won multiple awards. IGN stated that this was Rockstar's most authentic and lived-in open world ever. And for the most part, I agree. The open world design is flat out the best I've ever played. Everything from believable NPCs to pixel-accurate detail. It's all here. And the narrative? Oh man. Taking home the Game Award for the best narrative, Rockstar nailed its characters, as this is one of my favorite stories ever told in the video game medium. It's only in the linear mission design that this game faceplants into the mud. And this is a big deal, because if you can't justify your gameplay, then your video game is less of a game and more of a video. I look at a lot of critically acclaimed games in the past 5 years, and all I can say is, if you take away the graphics and the impressive animations, you'll notice a lot of the issues that I'm about to point out. Perhaps the best way to show is through an example. Early on in the narrative, you had captured a rival gang member hoping to spill some secrets. After threatening to cut his balls off, literally, he tells you about this cabin in the woods where the rival gang is stationed. So you ride with him, arrive at the cabin, clear the enemies, and steal some loot. Simple enough of a mission. From a mission design perspective, there's a clear objective and enough motivation for you to complete this mission. However, the open world design does not factor in whatsoever. So in another playthrough, I decided to do something a little different, since I knew exactly what was about to happen. So before starting the mission, I decided to go to the cabin beforehand and clear all the enemies, hoping to see a secret cutscene or at least a reduced amount of enemies during the mission. But when I arrived there, nobody was home. Must have all gone fishing. So I rode directly back to camp and started the mission. During the mission, when arriving at the cabin, you guessed it, all of a sudden everybody's here. So you're telling me that in the span of 6 minutes, the entire gang decided to move in and sing Kumbaya by a bonfire? Now, I know I'm just picking on the game here, but this is obviously supposed to be a story mission encounter only. But if you're going to commit in doing all of these Cowboy Simulator tropes, then commit fully. And at this point, I began to realize how many of these missions in Red Dead 2 are exactly like this, where whatever you do in the open world, no matter how sensible it might be to you, ends up being inconsequential to the independent, linear, restricted mission design. The Arthur Morgan, who's the main protagonist of the game if you didn't know, that you play in the open world is my Arthur Morgan, but the Arthur Morgan that you play in story missions is Rockstar's Arthur Morgan. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing if the game just committed to picking one version of Arthur Morgan rather than bouncing back and forth. Red Dead 2 fails to identify as this linear narrative-driven game or even a sandbox type of open-world cowboy simulator. Now, if this video sounds familiar so far, it's because it is. In fact, several YouTubers have already made this video. But this video isn't about what's wrong with open world mission design, but rather my proposal to what can be good open world mission design. Now, just to be clear, I'm not a game developer, I'm not a game designer, I'm an engineer. And as an engineer, my everyday job is to find ways to innovate on existing processes. I've been playing video games for quite some time now, and over the years I've had my own ideas on how to innovate on this existing genre that is open world video games. So without further ado, let's begin. The way I'm going to structure this is with a before, during, and after segments of a mission in an open world. Let's begin with the before. So many open world games fail to put enough emphasis on starting a mission. This is often neglected because it's just easy to put a marker on your map and show you exactly where you need to go. Not only is this lazy, but it's immersion breaking. It makes traversal across the open world seem filler or time wasting rather than an integrated part of the game. Instead, why not make the traversal to begin a mission itself an objective? Example: you finish a mission and you get your typical cutscene where someone tells you to go to the town of, let's say, Austin, to start the next mission. Once you exit the cutscene, you should not see a map marker. Make it the player's objective to find their way to the next mission. There are several ways to do this. Mainly, I would like to focus on either AI or visual cues. The most basic option is to use the in-game map and let the player find the town of Austin on their own. Another option is to incorporate NPCs to talk to and ask them about the whereabouts of locations in the world. If there can be a greet and antagonize option, add an extra option to ask about locations as well. Some NPCs may respond by saying, "Yeah, I know where Austin is, it's just east of here," or "Hey, pull out your map and I can show you exactly where it is," or "It's by a giant oak tree just west of the capital." Whatever the response is, it's immersive. They may ask you for money in return, or ask for a service to be done, or you can just plain threaten them to tell you. I know there's a lot of concern with this design option considering you must now voice several NPCs to talk back to you about various locations in the world. A way to bypass this for smaller budgets is to set certain NPCs in the world to be explorers or cartographers who know every location that can be spread throughout this world. So now you can voice a few people in the world to tell you where to go. The other method I mentioned to stress is visual cues for activity. As a player, you should be able to easily identify what's a shrine, a synchronization point, an enemy hideout, or have signs and boards directing players to locations. I know this isn't realistic, but there's a key difference between immersion and realism. Immersion is believing that you're playing a certain character. Realism is playing that character as if it were real life. I'm willing to sacrifice realism in games if it means that I'm having more fun immersing myself in the world that looks unique and fresh at every turn. Otherwise, every part of the world ends up looking the same, like real life. Traversal is one of the most important design features in games. As a player, I often ask myself that very question. Is traversal fun the first hour, the 10th hour, and even the 100th hour? There are very few open world games that I can say traversal is fun on the 100th hour, and it becomes even more difficult to do when games focus on getting from point A to point B directly. Walking or riding a horse isn't a lot of fun to most players because you're mashing the same button over and over again. When I played Red Dead, I didn't mind riding a horse the first hour nor the 10th hour. I was distracted by the beautiful world and I was enjoying everything I was seeing. But come the 100th hour, I had seen everything in the world, and I became so tired of it that I began using the fast travel option more and more. And is that the point? The thousands of labor hours spent making this game look the way it does just to be eye candy for a few hours? Then having it all be forgotten because the gameplay to move across this beautiful landscape is so repetitive and tedious. Instead, why not make the traversal itself a side objective? It not only lends to better game design, but more enjoyment out of the game the 100th hour. Next, let's talk about the open world mission design during the actual mission. There is nothing that frustrates me more in open world games than hand-holding in missions. Whether it's painful forced slow walking in locations, the inability to use weapons of my choice, or just plain boring missions with no purpose, aka fetch quests. But to answer the question of what makes open world games so unique, freedom. Players enjoy freedom in their video games. A quote I tell my friends and most people that play video games is that it's the job of video game creators to provide the canvas in which players can paint any picture they want to. Once you start holding their hand and show them how, what, when, and where to paint, they lose interest and move on. Do not mistake video game sales as a data point for longevity. Hell, let's show the amount of people that play GTA Online and compare that to the percentage of people who finish the story. Even for a game like Red Dead, one of the greatest narratives to be ever told in video games, only has a 25% completion rate at the time of recording. Game Award for the best narrative when only a quarter of the player base that owns the game has experienced it? What? So once more, I'll continue with my example as before. You find your way to the town of Austin, you meet who you're supposed to meet, and a cutscene triggers. The person tells you to, let's say, kill somebody in town. Here's where the detachment from the open world begins for most games. Most games will tell you where the person is, what they look like, where to follow them, what weapon to use, etc. Whatever it is, it's scripted. Instead, why not just leave the original intent of the mission to what it is? Killing somebody. Instead of wasting the player's time in the open world with filler side quests and stupid collectibles littered out in the world, why not waste their time where it matters? In the mission. What I'm trying to say is, just tell the player, kill this person. Don't tell the player where the person is, or what they look like, or where you can find them. Let the open world act as the mission. Let the player explore the town of Austin. Talk to NPCs to gather clues and tips, or just by blind luck find the person. In what way this person of interest is found, it should be unique to the player's style of gameplay. It's hilarious to me that Rockstar gets this right in their online or multiplayer mode than their actual story, and they wonder why most gamers spend time in online rather than the story. I realize that developing and designing these types of missions can be difficult because there's a lot that can go unintended. But that's the point. It's supposed to be unintended. Because open worlds are unpredictable. They should be unique to each player. If games are to be scripted and easier to develop from a design perspective, then there's no need for an open world. Red Dead would have been one of the greatest games, if not take Game of the Year in 2018, if they would have just avoided the open world and stuck to back-to-back missions for a more consistent and believable delivery. Finally, let's talk about the after. This is handled well in most big-budget open-world games. Building gets demolished, or an enemy hideout gets cleared, the world reacts by removing these objects afterwards. But perhaps a key point to emphasize is how the gameplay changes after a mission. Yes, by removing these objects of interest, the mission does impact gameplay afterwards. But most video games do this to progress the narrative, not the character. So what do I mean by that? So take for example that you're a cowboy in the Old West, and you just finished a mission where you, say, robbed a bank. Most NPCs should react to your presence now, whether it's to report you to the law if they see you, run scared, or even acknowledge your deeds. It adds to the immersion. Making a town or a specific region locked off for a time period isn't immersion. It's just lazy game design. And once again, I know these things are difficult to develop, but focusing on them leads to a much more outstanding game. A simple mentality to have is that a smaller, more detailed environments are far greater to explore for players than to be a part of this bloated, huge, lifeless world. So back to the example we've been running with. So you kill this person of interest, and the entire town of Austin now has changed. You discover the now killed NPC's hideout, their loot, their secrets. Moreover, the NPCs in the town should react to your actions by either praising you in dialogue, gifting you items, or providing you discounts at shops, or in some cases even running from you, plotting against you outside the narrative by either surprise ambushes or sending assassins towards you. Whatever the case may be, it makes the world come to life outside the missions. You see a change in progression not only in the narrative, not only in statistics, but also in traversal, which ties back into the before starting a mission. How will NPCs react now to help you find where the next mission will be? Will they be more helpful or dishonest? All of this contributes to good open world design, in my opinion. By now, you probably think I hate most open world games, but quite the contrary. I love playing these games and I will continue to play them. All I want is to see changes, innovation in this pretty stagnant formula. Several open world games these days are boring and bloated. The narrative is separate and has little to no impact on the open world. This formula of littering collectibles and having set-piece locations with heaps of nothingness in between, once made famous by Rockstar in Grand Theft Auto 3, is unimaginative. There were very few games in the past decade that have captured my attention like GTA 3 did. Too many games encompass the idea that the player moves around the open world, rather than the open world moving around the player. But on the grand scale, these criticisms are so minor to most AAA studios, especially since they rake in millions if not billions of dollars in sales. So why change? I have hopes that someone will, not because they need to, but because they want to. As in engineering, what makes a great engineer is the mark of improving and innovating on each iteration in hopes to finding the next best solution. Thank you for watching.